HMRC's new AI monster machine has already reportedly recovered $4.6 billion in the last tax year alone by doing things like monitoring your social media. So how's it doing it, and could you be next? Well, watch on. As a business accountant, my team and I spend all day long helping small business owners on their journey, and we've seen firsthand just how powerful HMRC's data gathering systems can be with our own clients. In this video, I'm going to break down the system they use and show you some real-life examples of it in action. I'll also walk you through some of the other scary digital tools that HMRC has at its disposal and show you how this shift to a fully digital system is going to impact your business. And finally, I'm going to give you a few simple tips to keep you out of trouble as these new systems roll out. The system that's made the headlines recently is the HMRC Connect system. Now, this system's actually been around for many years, but seems to get better and better and better. It reportedly can draw data from a scary 55 million data points, and that includes things like bank transaction, company's house, the land registry, your tax returns, the DVLA, the electoral roll, Airbnb, PayPal, Etsy, eBay, crypto exchanges, Auto Trader, and a load of other platforms. And perhaps most worryingly, your social media accounts. HMRC have recently confirmed that they do in fact use AI to monitor those social media accounts. Now, although this might sound shocking, HMRC officers have actually been doing something similar for years. I remember personally sitting in an investigation many years ago, probably around 2015-ish, where a HMRC officer asked my client how much he got for the sale of his boat and where did the funds go. Now, the client at the time was confused about this until the officer showed him the prints of his Facebook status, where he'd basically been promoting an eBay listing for a boat. Now, it turns out this boat belonged to his sister, and once they'd kind of proven everything, that was all okay. But it just goes to show you the kind of monitoring like this of social media has been happening for a long time. Now, on top of human officers, they've now got AI working in the background, looking for patterns, anomalies, risk areas, and what HMRC refer to as lifestyle indicators. That essentially means it's checking to see if your spending matches your declared income. So for example, the AI could be looking for how you're living now and what you're spending versus what you say you're earning on that tax return. And here's a few real-life examples of how we've seen this data being used. The first one involved a client who was an OnlyFans creator. So OnlyFans shared their data with HMRC, so they knew that she hadn't been declaring her income. So then they just opened up an investigation into her affairs. So she received the old dreaded brown envelope through the post, and it basically, you open it and it informs you that there's an impending investigation. And by the time she came to work with us, this process is already underway, but we were able to review the level of expenses that were being claimed and kept that tax bill down, because she'd been too nervous to claim anything herself during the investigation process, because she didn't have the knowledge, was worried about what this type of work can have in terms of expenses. And it is actually quite a tricky area to navigate. As you can imagine, it's quite a niche job where it comes to expenses. In the end though, we did actually receive a solid result and kept those penalties down, because remember, the fines and the penalties for HMRC coming to your door first can be up to 100% of the tax owed. You'll be pleased to know though, she's now fully compliant and up to date, and of course declaring all of her income via that tax return, but she still only pays the actual tax she needs to pay and no more. Now, the next example involves what is known as a HMRC nudge letter, which is essentially a polite way of saying, we don't think you've declared all the income, which is actually pretty funny because they know that you haven't declared it all from their data, but they're being oddly nice about it at this point when you receive that letter. Now, the letter gives you a time limit to which you have to respond, and you can either argue the case or just say, yeah, look, it's correct, or you can update your tax return. So in this case, the client had bank accounts abroad that were earning interest, and they hadn't actually thought that HMRC here in the UK would even care because it was foreign. However, under UK tax residency rules, HMRC cares about your worldwide income. So the overseas interest needed to be on the UK tax return, and they had to declare it there, and they just hadn't. Now again, penalties are in play, so we had to sort this out pretty quickly, and we did. But if you receive one of these nudge letters from HMRC saying, we think you haven't told us about something, they're normally true. I think I've only ever seen one instance where that's not the case, and that was a very, very niche area where somebody had a very specific rule elsewhere that meant these things weren't taxable in the UK. So if you do get one of these letters, make sure you do your homework and see what data you might not have told them about, because they obviously feel there's something there. Now, one type of income we're seeing being flagged more and more with these nudge letters here in the UK is Airbnb earnings. Now, Airbnb, like all the other online platforms, now has to share its data with HMRC. So as a result, if you're not declaring it, they're going to know, they're going to find out, and they're going to approach you. Now, you do get £1,000 a year property allowance. That means some of the income could be tax-free. But again, in my experience, I've only seen these nudge letters when there is actually tax to pay and you're earning over £1,000. So again, if you've got Airbnb income, make sure you are declaring it all, because they do know. Now, while we're on the subject of property, if you own a rental property and you're not declaring the rental income, or you sell it and you don't declare that, it's super easy for HMRC to find out. Now, it's because they've got all this land registry data and a load of other information, so they know what you own. So a letter from HMRC is especially common now if you you've sold that rental property in the year, particularly because they now want you to file a special capital gains tax return within 60 days of you having sold it and pay the tax. So they're very keen to make sure you get that one in. And I've seen this a few times where people have just got this wrong, normally with dates. So one particular case, client sold the property right at the end of the tax year, but they got the dates wrong by literally a couple of days. So HMRC wrote to them, did a nudge letter, and they said, look, we think you haven't told us about this property. Now, actually, they were going to declare it on the next return, but I mean, if we'd seen it, we would have spotted it. But they didn't, so then they had to go and say, yeah, okay, I have got it. Sorry, I got the dates wrong. Here's your tax. But again, it's very difficult sometimes to avoid penalties and particularly interest if this happens. So just make sure you're keeping an eye on it if you do it. And if you're not declaring that rental income, you need to make sure that's sorted. There are mechanisms to do that. So yes, they are watching where property is concerned. So one thing that surprises people is that even the HMRC collection officers, the guys that come to your door when you owe money to HMRC and haven't been paying, they've actually got a surprising amount of information about you. We actually get on really well with our local collection officer. He's in here every now and then for clients. And it's amazing when you have a chat with them how much data they have got. It's especially quite interesting when you hear these stories where they're talking about an instance where somebody's saying, look, I just can't afford to pay you, but the data they've got suggests otherwise. So alongside all this data, HMRC's digital powers continue to grow, giving them loads more ways to spot discrepancies. So recently, HMRC have reaffirmed they're going to use the direct recovery powers they've got in instances where taxpayers just aren't playing ball. So if you owe over £1,000, HMRC actually have the power to take it directly from your bank account. Now, there are a ton of safeguards in place, and they say they only use it when they've exhausted other avenues, but the power now exists and is actually being used. The key here is to make sure that you engage with HMRC about any debts you've got. In our experience, whether it's on the phones or whether it's local officers, they're pretty generally reasonable people, and they're going to agree a time to pay if you just communicate with them. I've only ever seen the more extreme powers being used where somebody just doesn't respond or ignores them completely. And there's a lot of powers they can use alongside this one where they can just pull money from your bank. So what can you do to avoid getting into trouble in the new world of AI and data? So firstly, and most obviously, just declare everything you should. If you're actively declaring your income on tax returns, it's unlikely you're going to get in trouble because most of the red flags at HMRC's sort of end come from their data machine from income that's not been reported. So most tax return inquiries we see are just where HMRC simply expects to see income on a tax return and it just isn't there. And then secondly is keep good records. And I would say these days, keeping good digital records yourself is really going to help. In a world where HMRC intends that by 2030, 90% of interactions with them are going to be digitally, keeping good digital records is now essential. If you're self-employed, you've probably seen that HMRC have got these new making tax digital rules, and they come in as early as 2026. And those rules mean that you need to keep digital records and you have to report digitally every quarter. And if this is news to you, I've actually done a detailed guide on that, so make sure to check out that video. But the thing to remember is under these rules, you still need software and there's no free HMRC tool to do it. So if you currently aren't keeping digital records, I would start looking for that software now. I personally recommend starting that journey by looking at Xero, that's with an X. Clients constantly rate it as the easiest to use, and it's my personal favorite. If you'd like to get started with Xero and test it out, you can actually go to heelanassociates.co.uk/Xero and get yourself a crazy cheap deal to get you going. Now, if you're thinking all this big brother kind of stuff sounds really scary, in our experience, it's probably not as bad as it seems. Now, I've seen countless videos and blogs sort of sensationalizing these powers and how they would use technology, but much of this hasn't actually been confirmed by HMRC at all. I spent hours and hours looking at this over the last few months and trying to unpack it. There's actually very little data confirmed by HMRC, and if you think about it, it's for good reasons. They don't want the people they're trying to catch knowing how they're looking at them. Most of what's been reported and talked about is just people inferring things from the limited amount of quotes and HMRC publications that are actually out there and stuff that journalists have said. So don't panic, just declare your income, keep good records, and you can't go far wrong. Now, if you know you're not declaring everything, then get some professional help to guide you through that and how to approach HMRC. There are set ways to doing it. You can minimize the penalties, and the lowest penalties are when you offer the data, when you come forward to HMRC, not the other way around. If you want to learn more on record keeping or filing tax returns, watch some of these videos next.